Welcome to eyes. We're going to jump right in and get started on building the basic structure of the eye. So these are female eyes. We've looked at some male eyes, knowing that there are lots of differences, lots of variety, but we're going to just start with kind of the basics of how to build the structure of the eye. So we're going to start with a HB pencil. You're going to have a 2B, and an eraser. Make sure you have all your supplies. So to get started, we're going to start with an ellipse, just like we did last class. So let's practice a couple of ellipses to warm up. So again, lifting your arm, your wrist off of the table. We're not going to lay down any lines yet. You're just going to do the motion of an ellipse. So when you're ready, just lay down some lines and do them just nice and light. Do a few of them. Make sure they have no pointy ends at the long end, so we have a few ellipses there. So you're going to keep enough room to be able to build an ellipse in the middle and then two on the either side, which will be the distance between the eyes and then the width of the eye. So let's start with an ellipse. That will be the distance. So probably not this big, not as big as this. So let's start a little smaller so that we don't make them too big so it doesn't take too long. So there's the start of my ellipse. After that, I'm going to make two little hatch marks to show the very outer edges of that so I know where to start my other ellipses. And this is about the distance. So trust your muscle memory as much as you can and just, again, do the motion, kind of look at the size, do the motion, and meet it up there. Do your best to make the same size and make as many lines as you need to. Just make sure you're light about it because then you can erase it so again, just doing the same thing over here. Do your best to make the same size. And there you've got your lines for your eyes. So then we are gonna, right where the intersection of these ellipses are, kind of at the lower corner, I'm gonna make a dot and a dot and make sure they are relatively in line with each other. And at that dot, I'm going to come up and follow the line at an angle to the top of the ellipse on both of these. So go ahead and do that. And then again, angles should be similar. The distance from the dot should be similar. Just be checking in with that. Now from that angle line, take this across, follow the ellipse to the end on both sides. And make your sketchbook and paper move for you. Don't move your arm. And make these lines nice and sketchy. And again, making sure those outer corners are relatively in line with each other. And you've got your upper lid. Then let's make the lower lid. So you want to come back to this angle line at the very bottom and you're going to make a little scoop. And this is going to be the tear duct. Just a little scoop like that. You're going to come up and make a smooth transition and curve it over to this lower line and pull it over to the edge, which it's actually easier to sometimes start on this corner and pull it back this way. Again, make your paper move for you. And then you've got your lower. And now you can erase this in the middle. Try not to erase your eye. Okay, and now we've got that built. You can take that and erase some of the extra. All right, before we get any further, I want you to be remembering about what we talked about, that underneath our skin is the structure, the bony structure of our eye. So you can see clearly here, the bony structure of the skull creates the brow bone and the cheekbone and the nose bone. These are all the bones that help protect our very sensitive eyeball. So this is quite large. I mean, some sockets are bigger than others, but generally it's a very large socket. So you want to be thinking about that when you're thinking about what's sitting in the structure. So to start with, I'm just going to do a light circle to indicate, and it comes a little bit away from the tear duct because that's your nose bone. Okay, but just kind of setting it in a circle so that we can hold in our minds that there's a lot going on behind there and that it's very three-dimensional. So we're not just drawing lines on a paper. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is to start creating some of that three-dimensionality and understanding. So right in here, we're going to separate the tear duct from the sclera, from the eyeball, the sclera, the white of the eye. And again, remembering and picturing that it's a sphere inside there. So it's not just this curved line, but you want to imagine it's a sphere in there that comes all the way around. Okay, so we've separated that. Now we're going to create the upper lid. So the upper lid is often a very defined line that shows where the fold of the eyelid is. And obviously there's different shapes, but you can see that it doesn't come and touch the eye, this part of the lid. It comes very close though. So we start at the same angle. And I often like to do a little bit of an angle instead of a complete curve, just because it shows more of the change of the plane, the change of the direction. So go ahead and do that. So start closely to that, come up, turn the corner, and then find a way to make it angle down. I don't really like that one, but we're gonna go with it. So that's that. The other part is to show the lower part of how the skin curves over. And sometimes it's just shade, shadow. Some people don't have lines, but it's really good to indicate where that skin also folds over. So right under this, kind of following the line of where the eyeball is, just kind of indicate with some shady lines how that works, like that. Okay, so now we're creating some form underneath there. Let's work on some iris. So the iris is the colored part of the eye. And often the mistake made with irises is that they tend to be too round or too small. So when looking straight ahead generally, well, pretty much always, part of the iris will be cut off, and it's often the very top of the iris that will be cut off by the upper lid. Sometimes both. Like in this one, she's got a little bit of squinting happening, so it's cut off on the bottom and the top. So you never see the full iris, and if you try drawing it that way, you end up this drawing looks really creepy. So we're gonna make sure that the top of our iris is cut off. So the way that we do that, you can use a template to, you can even use coins sometimes, like at home if you wanna do this, but I really want you to practice doing this freehand. So you're taking the size of your eye and you're picturing a circle right in the middle of it. And you want to think about the circle touching the bottom here, but also coming up above. So doing the same thing that we did with the ellipses, where we're not laying down any graphite. And again, turn your paper if you need to. And thinking about the circle and laying down some lines. And this will take some practice. It's okay. I'm not even that amazing at it. So then lay down some lines when you're ready. But part of your circle should definitely be going over that lid. Okay, and go ahead and do the other one too. Again, do the motion, center it as much as you can, and go above that eyelid. And now you have the lines for the iris. So go ahead and darken those lines, make the iris touch the bottom lid. Do your best to keep the whole circle in mind, and then erase where it went over the lid. Just like that, and you've got your irises. Next, let's do the pupil where the light comes in. This is the part that changes size depending on how much light is coming in through in the room or outside. And when we're drawing irises, we're gonna start with making a complete iris, which is the black part of the eye. And these are not great, but there's always a reflection in the eye. So for instance, with hers, you can't even see the whole pupil because the reflected light is what kind of gets in the way of seeing it. So maybe this is a better example. Right there. So the light that's reflected in her eye is often occluding or blocking some of the pupil. So we indicate that. This one's a very clear one right here, but she also has dark colored eyes. So we indicate that by leaving some of the pupil out, essentially, but let's start with the full pupil. So again, you're picturing your full circle. You're not just picturing what you see, you're imagining the full circle, and the pupil will be in the center of that. So start with a light touch, start right in the middle and work your way out, making as symmetrical of a circle as you can. Again, picturing the full pupil right in the full iris, and then starting from the center and moving out. Being conscientious of the size. I think my iris on the right is smaller than the left one, and that's okay because we're just practicing. And that's totally fixable as we go along too. So we have that, okay? So the next part to look at, I want to be thinking about how we can start making more form happen here. So one of the ways to do that is to start by creating the brow and so with the brow, you want to make lines that come right to the tear duct. Straight lines up and down, just very light. And generally right about there is where the brow line, where the brow starts. Sometimes it's not that way. Sometimes it's further back, sometimes it's like this guy, you know, he's got his brows starting way closer to the middle. So it just depends. So we're gonna just do the average, and it's generally for women's eyebrows, they're more curved than men's. So you wanna, again, this is where the socket, the bone socket, helps you know where the brow will be because it sits right on top. So right here, I want you to just make a rectangle that's kind of straight across. You could just start with straight across, and once you reach almost the outer edge, just right shy of the outer edge, you change the direction and you go down. Okay, and I'm actually going to come a little even further this way. Well, just make a rectangle like this and then bring it down. That's the most simple eyebrow. So you start with a straight line that's right in line with this. You kind of follow the angle of the eye like this, and then you, at the arch right before the end, you take it down. And then there's going to be all kinds of different shapes and things you can do with this. So let's do the other side. So picturing the brow bone, picturing the bone up here, we're going to go up this high, and keeping in mind what's across from you because they're the same. And you're going to do the same thing where you kind of make this rectangle, and this rectangle gets a little more narrow, and then you change direction right before the end, so right about there, make a little triangle. So one of the things that I say, especially about eyebrows and eyes, is that they're siblings, they're not twins. Okay, they don't have to be exactly identical, but they are siblings. So they should look relatively the same. Okay. To start from where we left off with our eye and hopefully work toward this today. It is an ambitious goal and we're gonna try our best. So we have left off here, and I want you to, let's do some darkening. So I want you to take your 4B, and I want you to darken that upper lid. That upper lid is dark because there are lashes, and it is also in shadow. So the upper lid tends to be darker, and there will also be shading underneath it, and then you'll add lashes, and so it creates, the upper lid is usually much darker. You can pull it around a little bit into the tear duct, but don't go underneath because the lower lid is much lighter. Let's darken the iris. So we're creating the darkest values that we will have. We're not going to darken the pupil yet because we will be building that more slowly. Let's also darken the crease because that is where it recedes back into the eye socket. So everything should kind of fade off without having like a heavy end. So everything should just kind of like fade off just like that. All right, so we have some of our darkest values. All right, so this part is a little bit tricky. So something that helps create the sense of realism in an eye and that is often forgotten is what's called the waterline. Let me find a picture of a very clear waterline. So our eyelids that protect our eye have a thickness. They have mass to them. So if you look up here, you can see that there's a part of the lid of our skin that holds tightly to the eyeball. And then there's a little ledge and then our lash line. We have it both on the top and the bottom. So there's muscles and skin that hold tightly up against the eyeball, and then a ledge, and then a lash line. And that ledge is something that adds realism to your drawings and adds three-dimensionality, which I don't even know is a word. The other part is understanding this little forgotten guy, which is called the tear duct. And to indicate that in drawing, you have to do some very specific lines, and it creates a more realistic look. So, for instance, on this drawing here, I have made an effort to create a waterline that you can see. You can see it on the lower lid, not the upper lid, because that's in shadow as we're looking straight ahead. And then a tear duct and muscle tissue. So we're gonna try to do this. So it's important to have a sharp. We're gonna do HB and make sure it's sharp because we're gonna make some very subtle lines. So we have this one contour line that we have used to go all the way around the whole eye to indicate the shape of it. We're actually gonna separate that contour line into two very fine lines. So the one that we have here, so remember we kind of did, to indicate the eyeball, we did these two lines. So that line I want you to use as this continuous line. It's still thin, we're not making it thick, it needs to be very fine. And that's the one that holds tight up to the eyeball and helps hold it in the socket so it's not just rattling around in there. So what we're gonna do is underneath and beside that, so it's on either end, just like, so as something moves away from you, you can see different planes and surfaces, but as it's right in front of you, it looks like one surface. I don't know if that makes sense, but let's try to show that. So over here, I don't know if my pencil is sharp enough. We're gonna make a parallel line very lightly. I don't even know if you can see this. And it's actually gonna we're not gonna indicate it in the middle. And we're gonna take from the tear duct here. So this line is up close to the eyeball, following that line. We're gonna create another line from the tear duct and pull it to meet this one. And this is gonna help us create that water line. So let's take a look at this picture here. So you can see how the skin comes around, and that's in shadow, and then it becomes in light because that's the way the light's hitting it. So the light tends to hit this lower lid, this lower ledge, more than it does anywhere else. So we want to make sure that we have a light value there. And then the lash line is a darker value. Do you see that? And then you can see the muscle tissue. All right, next we are going to work on the iris. We're going to start building realism in the iris. So the iris has all kinds of lines and shading. So I am actually just going to use my tortillon and I'm going to fill in that whole eyeball. And if your pupil disappears, that's okay. So fill in your whole eyeball just like that. Now take your HB pencil and you're going to let's re-indicate the pupil a little bit so we at least have the size. Just really light because you want to be able to erase this. So we're just indicating the placement and making sure he's still there. Okay, so we have lines that indicate, I don't know that I have a good picture of it. We have lines that indicate color in our eyes. So they both come out from the outer edges of our eyeball and from the pupil. So you want to think about like the teeth of a comb coming together irregularly. So let's, with our HB, let's create, and the lines need to follow the circle. So they're not coming across the circle in weird ways. They're coming from the edge and they're going to the pupil. So you want to make sure that they're working toward the pupil. So if you're drawing a line and they're light, you just start indicating, not a lot, just some lines that point toward the pupil, like that, like a clock face. Then I want you to, in between those lines, I want you to indicate lines coming out from the pupil toward those. Again, these are just very light. So this is a beginning, okay? This is not, I'm trying to make something step by step that is more, can be more intuitive, okay? So let's start and figure out where you want this highlight. So for instance, this highlight is on the inner part of the eye, but if you're talking about symmetry here, this is the, as I'm looking at it, this is the right eye and this is the left eye. If the light, remember we talked about the direction of the light, if the light is coming from over here and it's reflecting off of this part of the eye, it means that it's going to be reflected over on the same side of the eye over here. So I'm going to take an eraser, so find an edge of an eraser, and I want you to just erase. This is going to be hard with, so erase like a square, kind of create a square there, and the pupil disappeared, right? So what we're going to do, take your 4B and you're going to still just indicate where that pupil is a little bit, okay? Then I want you to take your 4B and I want you to make little marks, just like those little lines. We're not going to follow those lines that we made, but you're going to make little marks and make sure they always point to the pupil, both out from the pupil and toward the pupil from the edge. So indicate with those marks, keeping that outer edge of the pupil very dark. And, you know, depending on the color of an eye, blue eyes tend to be, you're not going to have as much dark, but obviously dark brown eyes, you're not going to even see these lines, okay? So again, this is just subjective. So this is a much lighter eye right now than this one. So I'm going to take my tortillon again, and I'm going to do a little darkening, and I'm going to do kind of like spots. I'm not going to do the whole thing, but kind of on this inner, in between the pupil and the edge, I'm going to create some just spots to indicate a darker value. And I'm going to go back in with my 4B, maybe indicate some more lines, because everybody's got unique and special dots and lines in their eyes, which are super cool. Okay, so it should look a little bit like that. All right, so the next thing I want to do is I want to indicate, so the white of the, when we talk about the white of the eye or the sclera, it's kind of a misnomer, because when we are actually looking at the eye, sometimes people's eyes, you know, are very, the whites of their eyes are very white. But if you really notice, there's all kinds of parts of our eyelid that are casting shadows or reflections. So really when we're drawing an eyeball and the sclera, it's not as white as we think it is. So if you look at that eye, as it recedes into the skin, there's shadow. So we must indicate that to create some three-dimensional elements. So if you see here, so wherever the eye comes in contact with the lid, especially the top lid, you're going to get shadow. So we're going to take our tortillon and we're going to just fill in, and depending on how dirty it is, so lay it down, you know, press down right underneath the lid to get it darker, and then start lifting as you move out. But as it recedes back into the head, that's going to be where it's the darkest. And don't worry about like just completely filling it in. You can take your eraser and erase it later. So go all the way across the iris too, because it casts a shadow over the iris and it mutes out some of the details in the iris anyway. Okay, and we have the beginnings of a good shading. So let's take the 4B again, and we're gonna thicken that upper lid again and thicken that shadow. And we can start to indicate those lashes a little bit more. We don't want to work too much. Lashes are a really good thing to do at the end, because then you're not having to erase in between like I'm going to have to do. So darken underneath there and darken along the edges a little bit, and where the eyeball recedes, darken those lines, and then blend it out again. So this is a lot of blending. All right. I want you to take your tortillon as well, and we're going to kind of indicate the way that the skin recedes under the eye as well, to show that curvature. Where am I looking here? Right there. Kind of the curvature. That's really bad lighting. That goes underneath there. So we're going to do this. So that shadow is going to be deeper. It kind of goes around, if you can see that, kind of goes around that. And let's keep working. Let's keep moving with this tortillon. Let's create some shadow. So go up and over that line, because nobody just has a line. There's also shadow on either side of it a little bit. Okay, let's go up to the brow with our tortillon. Let's stop at the brow, but right in here where the nose, the shadow of the nose is. I'm trying to figure out which one is a good one. This one's a pretty good one. You can see how far that comes out to indicate that skull, the eye socket, where it recedes from the light. Okay, and then come under the eye. So we're leaving a little bit strip of white right there to kind of play around with. Okay, and then fading away out there. And just blend it out. Okay, let's fill in those brows, shall we? Hopefully you can see that. Okay, so we have our brow edge right here, and obviously nobody has this hard edge. So most people start out with a little bit of indication, light indication, and then darker, and then light again. So that's probably a really good way to start, is to just kind of start with some brows start kind of out like that, and they then work in the direction. And the brows generally grow this way, right? The direction of the hair goes this way. So start lightly. And then you can be more bold with like specific strokes, however you want to build the eyebrows. Eyebrows typically shouldn't come too far past the eye. They should just kind of be in line there with that. So you're just kind of flicking it, but you're staying with a nice steady line across, that it should have a pretty good indicator of groomed brows. So again, siblings, not twins. So obviously you just have to keep building to a heavier brow. how dark you want them. So you can keep building for that. So this one, I think I started much lower, which is very easy to correct. You just move it down a little bit and just make sure you're kind of staying in line with how that works. Okay. Oh, I could mess with that forever, so, but I'm not gonna. So now we have the beginning. So I'm gonna keep working in here and keep darkening the creases, darkening the lines. So as you can see over here, these lines, the water line, it's important to really make sure that it's clearly there without making it thick. So really making it defined without thickening it too much, if that makes any sense at all. And again, there's going to be lots of ways that we're going to keep trying to create more realism, but this is the beginning. This is the beginning stages of all of this. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of a line here to indicate creases in the skin and shadows, because there's just all kinds of that, right? There's just all kinds of, as we start to really look at our own eyes and look at photographs, there's just all kinds of folds to indicate realism. Okay, so don't be afraid of that. Let's take the tortillon, and so we're gonna get this nice and dark in here. So this, I want this to be nice and dark. I'm laying down some more graphite, and then I'm gonna blend it out right under there. And I'm gonna come out to the nose. I'm going around the tear duct because I'm not gonna get too close to that. Because that will indicate where it kind of comes forward. Doing more shading, and then right next to the eye, you can see this here. She's probably wearing a little bit of makeup, but it also recedes back to the eye socket there as well. So it's going to have a little bit of shading. Okay, but typically wherever the bones come forward, it's going to be highlighted. But you can just go over the whole thing. Oops, sorry, I'm off camera. You can just go over the whole thing. Blend it together, creating a mid-tone. Maybe this is a good eraser. So, and then go in and find your highlights. Figure out where the bones of the face come forward. Find out where the folds reflect and catch some light. Go all the way around the tear duct because that comes forward. Okay, go around here and make sure your waterline has some light reflecting off of it, and we'll go back in and do the lashes again. It is not a big deal. Right up against here, it recedes. So you want to kind of bring that in and receding again, and that's pretty dark. And then you find a clean edge, if you can, on your tortillon. And I can't find one, so I'm gonna blend it out again. It is a lot of erasing, a lot of blending, a lot of fun if you just stick with it. So you can already start to see how it's showing the three-dimensional aspects of this. So let's pop those eyelashes back in there. So you start underneath, flick out. And if you think about triangles, and they tend to be longer on the outer edges and get shorter as you move to the inner edges. But remember, they're straight up and down when you're looking at the front view. Create those lashes. Okay. Little triangles. Okay, Okay, and then this right here is your lash line, not the inner part, the outer part. So it's coming off the top. And these are so fine. They're just like little baby lashes. You can do your own little triangles, meet up at the tip of them, and it helps. Okay, and again, indicate those lines. It's okay to be a little sketchy. Darken your iris, darken your pupil, darken that where the eyeball recedes. And you have a more realistic eye than when we started. Look at that.